ahora sí continuamos. Tengo el gusto de presentarles a Daniel Hulme. Daniel es CEO de Satalia y director de IA en WPP. Les cuento más acerca de Daniel. Él es un experto mundial en inteligencia artificial, reconocido como uno de los 10 mejores directores de IA a nivel mundial. Imagínense el lujo de escucharlo. Tiene un doctorado en inteligencia artificial en la University College de Londres, donde también es emprendedor residente. Además, profesor en London School of Economics, miembro del cuerpo docente de Singularity University y es un orador frecuente en TED y en Google. Escribe sobre el futuro del trabajo y también asesora a empresas y gobiernos promoviendo la innovación tecnológica a nivel global. Un aplauso inmenso, por favor, para Daniel. Él nos va a contar sobre cómo podemos repensar la inteligencia artificial y su impacto en las empresas y en las personas. Bienvenido, Daniel. Mil gracias.
Thank you, thank you. I've been asked to speak very slowly. I'm not very good at it. If I'm speaking too fast, put your hand up or throw something at me. I won't be offended. I'm already speaking too fast. It's a problem. We're going to talk about AI. I'm going to give you a different framework to think about AI and how it applies to your business. We'll talk about how we can bring people and technology together to do amazing things. And we'll also talk about the macro impact that these technologies are going to have on society. So it's going to get quite philosophical towards the end. I've been involved in AI for over 25 years. I started a company 17 years ago that's been building AI solutions for some of the biggest companies in the world. I sold that company to WPP, the biggest media marketing communication company in the world, where I'm the chief AI officer. So I coordinate AI across about 120,000 people, and I get to invest in AI companies. And I've just started a company to try to solve machine consciousness. We can talk about that later if you want. So that's me, it's boring. Let's talk about AI. So I guess for the past 10 years, organizations have been getting very excited about data. They've been building data lakes. They've put some sort of analytics layer, Tableau, on top of that data lake, and hoping that by extracting insights from data and giving those insights to human beings, that it leads to better decisions. Giving human beings better insights doesn't typically lead to better decisions. Decision-making is a completely different field in computer science. There's many, many books out there that will help you understand that humans are not particularly good at making decisions. If I build a system that I give data to and it makes a decision, and tomorrow I give it the same data, it makes the same decision, what I have is automation. And automation is amazing because we can get computers to do things better than human beings. But does anybody know the definition of stupidity? It's doing the same thing over again and expecting a different answer. By definition, I would argue that automation is stupid. I know that everybody that currently touches these words calls themselves an AI company. It's fine, you get more clients, you get more funding. There are unfortunately many definitions of AI. The most popular definition, I think, is the weakest definition, which is getting computers to do things that humans can do. Over the past 3 years, we've managed to get machines to correspond in natural language, to recognize objects and images. And when we get machines to behave like humans, and because humans are the most intelligent thing we know in the universe, we assume that that's intelligence. Again, I would argue that humans are not that intelligent. That's a different conversation. There's a much better definition of AI that comes from a definition of intelligence. Instead of using human beings as the pinnacle of intelligence, we can use this definition, which is goal-directed adaptive behavior. Goal-directed in that we're trying to route our vehicles to maximize deliveries, or we're trying to stock our warehouses to minimize waste. Behavior is how quickly we can answer that question. And we'll talk later on about how hard it is to answer some of these decision problems. But the key word in this definition is adaptive. What you want to do is build systems that can make decisions, learn about whether those decisions are good or bad, adapt themselves so next time they make better decisions. If I'm honest with you all, you tend not to see adaptive systems in production. Most systems in production are automation. The true pinnacle of AI are systems that can safely adapt themselves in production. So instead of using definitions and technologies to think about AI, I'm going to give you a different framework. Before I do, a little bit of a history lesson. So this is AI in the 60s and 70s. It's Socrates. Socrates is famous for inspiring the Socratic method. If I say to you that Socrates is a man and all men are mortal, I can infer that Socrates is mortal. And AI in the 60s and 70s was writing down lots of things that we know about the world and then trying to infer new knowledge, and it didn't really work, it didn't really scale. In the 80s and 90s, a new type of AI came along that's modeled on how brains work. This is the brain of a bumblebee. My PhD 20 years ago was trying to model the brain of a bumblebee in a machine. Bumblebees have 1 million brain cells. You have 85 billion brain cells. But bumblebees can do amazing things. They navigate 3D worlds, they recognize objects, they talk to each other. They don't handle windows very well, but ultimately they're very smart creatures. And the question was, can you model 1 million neurons in a machine? 20 years ago we couldn't, but we can now model billions of brain cells. And we currently call these large language models ChatGPT, DALL-E. Now these brains are really good at knowing things about the world. They're really good at telling you what they know about the world through imagery, through text. They are not good at making complex decisions. They are not good at making predictions. Use these brains to know things, use these technologies to reason, to make decisions, and then build systems that can safely adapt themselves in production. Again, most organizations are a long, long way from this architecture. So again, instead of using definitions, I now look at AI through applications. And I believe there are 6 families or 6 categories of applications of AI that can solve any friction across any supply chain in any industry. So all of the frictions, all of the pain points that you have across your organizations can be mapped to one or more of these 6 applications. It's a bold statement, but here we go. So actually the first is task automation. The reality is if you apply very simple algorithms to replacing repetitive, mundane tasks that human beings are doing, you can drive a huge amount of value. You don't need to gravitate to new shiny technologies like generative AI and machine learning. The second category is content generation. And I don't just mean images and text, sound, video, but actually we can now start to create content such as environments. Large language models now have the ability to give everybody the ability to create generic content. But the battleground for organizations, the battleground for you, is not creating generic content. The battleground is creating brand-specific, production-grade, differentiated content. That's the battleground. These large language models are incredibly powerful, but what you need to do is you need to make them very, very smart to produce something that's differentiated for your organization. I can talk about this later if you like. In WPP, we create, I think, a third of the world's ads. So we build what we call brand brains that are tuned, trained to understand how to create differentiated brand-specific content. So creating content is just one side of the equation. The other side of the equation is understanding how people perceive content. So for the first time ever, we can now build brains that I call audience brains that we can show content to, or experiences, policies, promotional materials, ads, environments, to see how they think and feel about it. Historically, we didn't know what goes on in people's minds and bodies unless we ask them, and people are not very good at reporting on what goes on in their minds and bodies. For the first time ever, we can build brains that recreate how people think and feel about things, and we can use those signals, those insights, to create better content, better environments, and also predict activation, clicks, likes, sales, all that kind of stuff. And the trick is understanding what data do you need to represent an audience. It's not emails and telephone numbers and dates of birth. It's things like whether you've just fallen in love, how much money you have in your account, the weather, the time of the day, how well your soccer team played at the weekend. Understanding the data that you need to represent how people perceive things is actually, I think, a differentiator. The fourth category is insight extraction. This is what people called AI 3 years ago, before generative AI. It's machine learning, it's data science, it's extracting insights from data. You already know my opinion. Giving human beings better insights doesn't typically lead to better decisions. The power of machine learning is not making predictions. The power of machine learning is explaining those predictions. So this is actually a map of my employees. So we ingest lots of data from email and calendar and conversations, and we create these maps to try to understand people's influence, their skills, their relationships, their hopes, dreams, desires. I can identify secret lovers in my company. I can identify people who are going to leave the company before they know they're going to leave the company. And we use these insights not just to make decisions, but we use these insights to help us explain what's going on across our organization, so that we can ultimately make better decisions that work with their values and the values of the company. The fifth category is complex decision-making, and I've already alluded to this idea that decision-making is a completely different field in computer science. It's not generative AI, it's not machine learning. If you're old enough, it used to be called operations research. It's discrete mathematics. And just to give you an idea about what a complex decision-making problem is, imagine you have 5 staff members. You've got 5 people, and what you want to do is you want to allocate those 5 staff members to 5 jobs. 5 pieces of work. Ignore these rules, are not important. How many ways can I allocate 5 people to 5 jobs? 5 people, 5 jobs. How many possible ways can I allocate 5 people to 5 jobs? Anybody know? Remember the exclamation mark we learned in school? Factorial. 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. So there's 120 possible solutions. Let's make the problem a little bit more complicated. So I've got now 15 people. How many ways can I allocate 15 people to 15 jobs? And don't say 15 factorial, that's cheating. Roughly, what does your brain say? It's over 1 trillion possible solutions. So to expect a human to solve this problem, we're wasting our time. One rule to take away with you today: anything more than 7, don't use a human for. Okay? And industry don't have problems of this size, they've got problems of this size. So here are 500 staff members. Can you tell me how many ways you can allocate them? No, you can't. It's a big number. It's a number that's got over 1,000 digits. And just to put this number into context, this is how many atoms there are in the universe. Once you reach about 60 things you have to consider, in this case, 60 people allocated to 60 jobs, there are more possible solutions than there are atoms in the universe. You'll find lots of these problems exist across your organizations. Either human beings are solving them very badly, or you'll be using algorithms that will solve them probably very badly. The differentiator for organizations is choosing the right algorithm to solve the right problem. The final category is human augmentation. So a few years ago, I'd be talking about how we can use exoskeletons, cybernetics to make ourselves faster, better, stronger. One of the things that we've been doing in my company for some years, and one of the things I used to do before I realized it was illegal, is that we used to get everybody to make public recommendations for their salary. So you would all publicly declare what you want to be paid, and then people across the company would then vote on whether those salaries should be reduced or increased or kept the same. And we would use AI to determine how many votes one person has for another. So if you've worked very closely with that person, if you're very knowledgeable about their domain, you will have more votes for their salary than somebody else. So we've essentially augmented your decision with AI. We've given you a higher weighting if you've worked more closely with that person versus if you didn't. So I had interns that were voting on people's salaries that were more weighted than me. And actually it was interesting because it highlighted lots of interesting biases, particularly with females. Females tend to undervalue themselves. You can't see this very well, but these are all people in the company. This blue dot is one of our females. She requested a salary. She got a certain number of votes to approve her salary, a certain number of votes to reduce her salary, and a certain number of votes to increase her salary. Out of everybody in the company, she had the most votes to increase her salary. She went away, she came back with a new number. She had a certain number of votes to approve, a certain number of votes to reduce, and still had lots and lots of votes to increase her salary. She was still undervaluing herself. So this is an example where we can use AI to identify biases in people, and we can use the crowd, the experts, to solve that problem. Now, these are called liquid organizations, but unfortunately, most organizations look like this. This is a hierarchy. I'm sure you don't have any problems in your organizations like this. This is not a picture of my company, although most people do sell drugs to each other. That's quite common in my company. And I think we all understand that these structures are not conducive for adaptation. Remember, the faster we can adapt, the more innovative, the more intelligent we are. So organizations are now embracing agile, scrum, design thinking, and the principle behind these organizational structures is to enable our organization to adapt more quickly to a changing world. And actually, if you start to move towards these structures, you can then start to be data-driven. Agile and scrum forces you to quantify work, to understand how to allocate people with the right skills to that work. And once you start to have the data, then you can start to get smart about how to allocate people in a liquid way. I think that all organizations ultimately need to operate in a liquid way. That means getting the right people or the right diverse group of people to make the decision, rather than decisions being made in hierarchies. So actually, I would argue that this technology that I've talked about is already a commodity. We already have phenomenally powerful algorithms. They've been around for many, many years. The bottleneck, the battleground, the differentiator for companies is not technology. It's three things. The first thing is data. If you have data that contains insights that differentiate your business, then that's one differentiator. It's data that makes AI smart. The second differentiator is AI talent. Okay, if you want to build a differentiated business, you need to have differentiated AI talent. And finally, it's leadership. It's people that understand the transformational power of AI and how to apply it in the right way across your business. I love this quote from Steve Jobs. He said, "Innovation is creativity that ships." And for me, the most important word in that definition is the word that. That is generating ideas and getting to the point where they're being valuable. And that process is long and hard and painful. And what we want to do, we want to design our organizations in a way that closes that gap, that allows us to innovate more quickly. The faster we can innovate, the more intelligent we are. Okay, I love this framework because it also helps you navigate this complex world of AI, safety, security, ethics, and governance. I could talk for hours and hours and hours about these topics. There's a huge amount of scaremongery, misinformation, misunderstanding about the impact of AI on organizations. There are really three questions you need to ask yourself when applying AI. The first one is an ethical question, which is the intent appropriate? The difference between a human being and an AI is that human beings have intent. AIs don't have intent. And it's the intent, it's the intended use of the technologies that need to get looked at from an ethics perspective. The other two questions are my algorithms, are my AIs explainable? The difference between AIs and software is that AIs tend to be opaque in their decision-making. We can't see how they're making their decisions. So building AIs that are explainable is critical. And the final question you need to ask yourself is not what happens if my AI goes wrong. When we design systems, when we build software, we ask ourselves what happens when things go wrong. But now you have to ask yourself what happens if AI goes very right. What harm can it cause? You've probably all heard this, but if we gave AI the task of solving cancer, the easiest way to solve cancer is to eradicate human beings. Okay, so it overachieves its goal. And we do run the risk of AIs overachieving their goals, causing harm elsewhere. So I call those micro risks, which is how we deploy AI in our organizations in a safe and responsible way. There's also a set of risks that I call macro risks, which is the impact that these technologies are going to have on society over the next 10, 20 years. So I don't know if you know who said this at the top. The nation that leads in AI will be the rule of the world. Do you know who said that? Anybody? It was Vladimir Putin recently. And we need to acknowledge that these technologies are not just going to have the most profound impact on our business, they're going to have the most profound impact on society. And I think there are essentially 6 big questions we need to ask ourselves. 6 points in time that we can't see beyond. I don't know if you've heard the word singularity. A singularity is a point in time we can't see beyond. And I've tried to capture those singularities using this macro framework called PESTLE. I'm sure that maybe many of you have seen this before. So the first one is the political singularity, a world where we no longer know what is true. AI, misinformation, deepfakes have challenged our political foundations, and they will continue to challenge our political foundations, but they're also now challenging the fabric of our reality. people with $5 and a few seconds and a few images, I can clone you, I can clone your children, I can clone your work colleagues, and those clones are now being used for fraud, to attack people. In fact, the CEO of WPP 3 months ago was cloned, and somebody tried to use his clone to create a company and commit fraud. I actually think that AI can solve this problem. I think it's a problem that we can solve. The environmental singularity is, we know that AI is increasing consumption, and we know that consumption is putting pressure on our planetary boundaries. But I know if we apply AI in the right way, that we could halve the amount of energy that we need to run this planet. And the reason why I know that is because when I go and solve problems across supply chains, we can reduce typically the amount of carbon by 25, 50%. We can halve the amount of energy and still run the planet. This is not my expertise, but there are scientists that believe there are people alive today that don't have to die. AI is advancing medicine. It's able to monitor ourselves and clean ourselves out. And a bit like a car, if you stay on top of damage, then that car will never, ever break down. And I don't know what the world will look like when we realize there are people amongst us that won't have to die. The technological singularity is when we build a brain 1 million times smarter than us. Now, my community felt this wasn't going to happen for another 30 or 40 years. We think it might now happen in the next 10 or 20 years. And this is when we become the second most intelligent species on the planet. My advice to people is that when superintelligence comes, look busy, be nice to each other, and hopefully it will lead to a different dimension. That's why I hope will happen. And the reason why I chose to start the consciousness company is because I believe that building conscious AI and trying to align conscious AI with human values is safer than building zombie AIs. It's a different conversation. The legal singularity is when surveillance becomes ubiquitous. So I'm in the business now of understanding how people perceive things. How do you think and feel about things? And marketing is in the business of persuading people, changing people how they think about things. And that's an incredibly powerful position to be in. And what we want to do is we want to mitigate the use of these technologies from organizations accumulating a massive amount of wealth and power. The final singularity is my favorite singularity. It was coined by a very good friend of mine called Callum Chase. I'd highly recommend his books. This is the point about jobs. Now, for the past 17 years, I've been building AI solutions that have freed people from mundane, repetitive tasks. Those people have not lost their jobs. They've gone on to do more important, more impactful things. And I think the next 10 years, we're going to see a Cambrian explosion of the same. New innovations, new opportunities. AI is an energy source that will allow humanity to grow. Beyond 10 years, I don't think anybody knows what they're talking about. And to give you the two extremes of the argument, the one extreme is that when AI can free up whole jobs, it probably will. The pressure to reduce costs, increase profits, means that we will let people go. If that happens very quickly, if lots of people lose their jobs, our economies won't be able to rebalance, and it will create social unrest. And that's a real concern, and I think we need to be leaning into it. The other extreme of the argument, bear with me here, is that we should be removing the friction from the creation and dissemination of food, healthcare, education, energy, transport. We can use AI to make the goods that we need to survive and thrive free. Everything that you need to live and survive as a human being is free. Now, people say to me, Daniel, what would I do if I didn't have a paid job? A job defines who I am as a human being. I know lots of people who don't have paid jobs. I sold my company 3 years ago. I never, ever have to work again. I'm working harder now than I've ever worked. Most people that I know that don't have to work, they're not sitting at home bored and depressed. They're using their time and energy to try and contribute to humanity. So I'm going to ask you a question. What would you do if you didn't have to do paid work and everything was free? Your food was free, your transport, everything was free. What would you do? Golf is usually the first answer I get. What else? Technology? Psychology. You indulge in your hobbies. What else? Travel. Spend time with your friends, family. What else would you do? If you keep pushing people hard enough, they say the same thing, which is, I want to do something that contributes to humanity. I think we all have an innate desire to want to make the world better. We are all born into economic constraints, preventing us to really live for anybody other than for ourselves. And I think what AI can do is it can unlock all of us from those economic constraints. So the reason why I joined WPP is because I believe in their purpose. We've talked about purpose already. If you don't have a purpose, you're not going to attract talent, you're not going to attract customers. If you have a purpose, you will attract talent, you'll attract customers. The purpose of the company I chose to join was this, which is to use the power of creativity to make a better world. And I think a better world is a world where everybody is economically free to contribute to humanity how they want. And I think that AI can create that world. So on that note, I'm going to stop and open to questions. Thank you for listening.
Mil gracias. Ha estado increíble la cantidad de información. He anotado muchísimas cosas, en verdad, que me llevo. La figura del organigrama, bueno, trabajando en gestión humana, tendrán que he hecho chorrocientos organigramas en mi vida. Y la vez pasada me enteré que los organigramas ya tienen más de 100 años. ¡Qué loco! La forma en la que las empresas nos estructuramos y ordenamos, que es con organigramas, ha cumplido, creo que son 104 años, ¿no? Entonces, ¿cuánto han cambiado las empresas, ¿no? En los últimos años? Y la forma en la que nos estructuramos sigue siendo la misma. Y de verdad te aplaudo lo que decías, en el sentido de que lo miras y te mata la adaptabilidad y la flexibilidad, ¿no? Es como hacia dónde me muevo, ¿no? Muy interesante. Vamos con la primera pregunta. ¿Qué habilidades deberían desarrollar las personas para estar preparadas para este futuro que nos presentas?
Oh, it's a lovely question, and I don't think there's a profound answer to this question, which is, in university we learn knowledge and we get tested on what we know, and then the next day we forget it after we've been tested on it. And I think we all know that what we value in our work and the people that we collaborate with are resilience and cooperation and kindness and creativity. And so what our education systems need to do is they need to essentially allow you to apply knowledge in a way that is in adverse situations, in situations where you have to adapt, you have to change, you have to learn to cooperate. So I think all of those words are not new to you. It's just how do we become more creative, more considerate, and more adaptive. Remember, adaptive is synonymous to intelligence, and human beings are fortunately very, very adaptive.
Muchísimas gracias, de verdad que...
Oh, sorry, I just want to say, it's also learning how to ask better questions of AI. AIs know, or generative AI anyway, knows a lot about stuff. And we are finding in my company, in WPP, the creatives that understand like photography, lighting, aperture, camera angles are able to ask better questions. The creatives that understand art history or geography are able to ask better questions. So broadening your knowledge so that you can ask better questions to surface what the AI knows is also, I think, an important skill.
Es impresionante. La forma en la que haces la pregunta determina la respuesta, ¿no? Muchas veces. Entonces, es verdad, tenemos que saber cómo hablarles, ¿no? a las inteligencias artificiales. La siguiente pregunta pide que saques una especie de bola de cristal y que nos digas cómo ves la inteligencia artificial en los siguientes 10 años.
So again, let's assume that artificial intelligence means generative AI, and you know already that there's different types of AI, but at the moment, generative AI, or large language models, are a little bit like intoxicated graduates. And over the next 6 months, those intoxicated graduates are going to graduate to like a master's level. So they're going to be able to learn to reason, which is going to be a step change in their capability. 18 months later, I think that they'll go to a PhD level. I'm not talking about PhD knowledge. I'm talking about the ability to look at a problem, to break the problem down into different parts, to set experiments and hypotheses, to then test and solve that problem. 18 months later will be a postdoc. 18 months after that will be a professor. So by the end of this decade, we will all have a professor in our pocket. And now how quickly that will enter our business and affect the world, I don't know. But the next question you would ask a professor is, go and create an AI smarter than you. And that's where we might end up creating very, very smart AIs very, very quickly. It's called a fast takeoff, and we end up getting to super intelligence. But my prediction is we'll have a professor in our pocket by the end of this decade.
That's very useful, ¿no? Tenemos tiempo para una pregunta más. Desde tu perspectiva, ¿qué va a diferenciar a una empresa en la era de inteligencia artificial?
So I mentioned this already, your ability to adapt more quickly, and your ability to adapt more quickly means your organizational structures need to be reinvented. We know that we have expenses and onboarding and offboarding, and all of those things tend to be quite bureaucratic. They tend to be a brake on your ability to innovate. Data is a differentiator. If you can have access to data, I think purpose is a differentiator. I think if you want to attract and retain talent, you need to have a purpose. And AI talent in particular is a differentiator. Now, not all organizations can attract like deep mind level talent, people that are experts in AI. So I would try and find a partner that has that capability. But I think actually purpose is probably one of the most important things.
Muchísimas gracias, Daniel. Un fuerte aplauso, por favor, para él.